Hey everyone, welcome to Source, the ReThink Mining Podcast. I'm your host, Carl Weatherell. Today we're joined by Alim Somani. Alim's really cool because he's not from the mining industry. He's actually a serial entrepreneur. He's developed technologies and companies outside of the mining in the digital space. And today we're going to bring together his insights on digital and mining and where we can go from there. Let's get into it. So, hi everybody. My name is Carl Weatherell. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of ReThink Mining, otherwise known as CMIC, and the CEO of ReThink Mining Ventures. And today on our podcast, we have Alim Somani. He's one of the digital experts at Hatch, leading a lot of the digital work at Hatch. And Alim, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Carl.
So Alim, my understanding is you're not new, or you're not from the mining industry. You're relatively new to mining. So can you give me a bit of background on where you come from and what you've done?
Yeah, I spent most of my career running my own business. I ran a company called Infusion. Actually, just down the road, we started off just at Adelaide and Spadina. And we were a digital professional services organization. We did a lot of custom software development. We did a lot of design work as well, and graphic design, and we had an agency, but we primarily focused on the financial services industry. So we were actually headquartered in New York. Canada was kind of our nearshoring, center. But we spent 15, 16 years writing trading systems for Wall Street, really helping financial services through a lot of the digital revolution that they went through. Over the years, we diversified into other industries. We did some work in travel and hospitality, some public sector, pretty much every sector other than mining, resources, and so forth. And I sold the business about 6 years ago to a company called Avanade, which was a Microsoft and Accenture joint venture, and stayed there for a few years. And then I got a call from Hatch, and been here for the past 3 years.
Wow, that's cool. Now, it's really, I'm always curious because your financial services, digital, as you just said, nothing to do with mining, yet now you're in mining. How did you make that quantum leap?
I'll give you a slightly longer version. A few years before I sold Infusion, I was in Singapore for my first time, and I can't remember the name of the hotel, the Marina Hotel, the one with the big swimming pool on the roof, and I was in the pool because you gotta go in the pool, and everybody was crowded looking at the view of the city. The other side of the pool looked out into the ocean, and I remember, looking at that view and being fascinated because it was oil tanker after oil tanker after oil tanker, and it created a little bit of a curiosity in me. And what I realized, and I'm going to use some computer jargon, but most of the work I had done in my career was we were working on the front end of the world.
Yeah.
The back end of the world, what really got everything working, I wasn't that exposed to. So it maybe opened a little bit of a curiosity, for me. And so when I got the call from Hatch, and I learned a little bit about what Hatch was doing, a few things resonated with me. One, I'm a Canadian and I'm a proud Canadian, and I'd spent most of my career doing work out of Canada globally, but for industries that weren't overly Canadian. And so I thought that fascinated me and drew some curiosity. Two, I believed that for the most part, whatever I'd read in resources and specifically mining, it was a very data-rich environment, but because the locations tended to be remote, I saw a huge failure in the professional services organizations in the IT side in serving those industries. You needed to get dirt under your fingernails to be able to really help them.
No pun intended.
Yeah, there was an amount of domain expertise that you couldn't kind of fake.
Yeah.
And it felt like Hatch had that. And Hatch had, I thought the foresight, they were looking to make some investments in digital. And I thought that if we could combine those capabilities, there was a chance to make a difference. And so for me personally, I wanted to try something that would shift me out of my comfort zone and also satisfy some curiosities. So that's what I've been doing for the past 3 years.
So bridge the gap and be out of your comfort zone. So are you out of your comfort zone?
Absolutely, every day, every day.
That's the best answer.
But I'm learning a lot, and light bulbs are going off. And when you bring different disciplines together, sometimes you have a little bit of this, and then every now and then you connect and you can have a big impact.
The alignment happens, right?
Exactly.
So you said light bulbs. So you came in, you've been learning for a couple of years, knew nothing about mining.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you found out? You mentioned that a lot of the services don't have the capacity, the expertise. What have you found? What are some of the light bulbs? What are some of those connectivities that you've seen?
So it's interesting, and this is going to sound very obvious from someone maybe that's from the industry. But the mining value chain, it's very broad and a lot more discrete than what you'd see in other industries, right? Which to me, that it took me a while to figure that out. And I'll give you an example in banking. Okay, if you're working in, let's even say retail banking. Okay, we're in Toronto. You can go to First Canadian Place and there's a head office, and maybe they're rolling technologies out to branches. All right, that's things are fairly connected, and your distance to the customer and what you're supplying, it's fairly, you can get your arms around it.
Yeah.
Here there are real physical barriers, and totally different processes. Yeah. And there's and even the way projects, the duration of projects, right? You spend time looking for a site, then you spend time building out the site, and then you hand it over to someone that's operating. There's a lot of discreteness that happens in between, and when you have discreteness in a value chain, that creates inefficiencies and opportunities to improve things.
And discreteness in data, because you said it's a data-rich environment.
Exactly.
Are you seeing there's a massive barriers between the different data sets that are...
The amount of data loss or data, and not even loss, but just data that's not being used.
Yeah.
And data sounds very jargony. Information and knowledge, right? That's being lost, and context that's being lost is a lot more, I would say, noticeable here or predominant here than in other industries that I've been involved in.
This is what we've seen at CMIC as well. We actually did a business model for the industry and produced a layer. What are the business decisions that you're making at each point?
Yeah.
Then what's the different data that you're looking for at each point, and then finding out that they're disconnected and decisions made here should actually be made here.
Yeah.
But it's a bit of a challenge to get there. And we're also hearing too that some folks are saying, you said data rich, other people would argue, well, we don't have enough data, especially when you're talking about AI.
Yeah.
That's a big buzzword now, right? Is AI, artificial intelligence. Most people don't know what it means, but it's data rich, but.
Yeah, so prior to coming into Hatch, one of my pet peeves in the IT consulting industry was I thought there was a big push around these massive data transformations.
Yes.
And I think it was overdone.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people that were pushed to transform their data, and you need these massive data lakes, you need to pull everything together. And it made a lot of consulting companies and a lot of professional services companies a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then people ended up with these vast amounts of data, and the time to value was too long. It doesn't mean we don't need data, and it doesn't mean we don't need to pull it together. I think in the mining industry, it's the same thing. Sure, there could be some more data, there could be some more sensors and information. I think there's a lot of data there, and if you just start with, how do you start with the data that we have? Do the right people have it at the right times? And it's not just a technology issue. It's not just a digital issue. It's a people and a process issue. Yeah. Right. So and you and I have talked a little bit about this. If you're in the mindset and your job is to dig out as much ore as possible, and I'm running the processing facility, and my job is to increase throughput, but we're not connecting, and our KPIs are different. There's an issue there, and there's an issue there that other industries would have solved and changed, and that's an opportunity. And that's not just about getting you and I the right data. It's about changing our jobs a little bit and changing our perspective on it.
And even changing what's being measured, like you mentioned, KPIs.
Yeah.
But are KPIs relevant to the value to the business? Which is the answer to that is probably no.
Yeah.
Right. But going back to what you said before about there's probably enough data. We just have to do something with it. Yeah. And the word used previously was knowledge. Yeah. Extracting knowledge out of what we have to make better business decisions faster and great value.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Cool. So what are you doing like at Hatch? Like you've come in, you've been there a couple of years. What are the sort of things you're working on? I'm curious.
Well, so first, actually, from an approach perspective, one of the things that appealed to me about joining Hatch was we're taking a product-oriented approach to things. So sure, we're doing some professional services, but we're actually looking to say, we use the word knowledge.
Yeah.
And at Hatch, we've been around for 65 years serving the metals industry. And we have proprietary technologies that we've invested in. We have process knowledge. And our belief is that it's all in people's heads, both in our heads and in industry's heads. And if you can actually sit down and codify some of that, there's a real approach. Instead of approaching everything as bespoke, is there an opportunity to codify some of that knowledge and take a licensing approach to things? So first, I think that's interesting, because you can go and build a massive professional services team and say, we're going to do consulting and charge hours in digital.
And that's happening by a lot of other companies.
And there's a lot of other
that.
people doing that. And we're doing a little bit of that. I think the more interesting thing that drives a lot more value to clients is sitting down and saying, wait a second, there's all this knowledge. And there's a lot of knowledge that gets created in the engineering phase.
Yes.
Right? How do we perpetuate that into operations? And when we're in operations, combine that engineering knowledge with some process knowledge and some operational knowledge with some data and with some digital techniques. Wait a second, how can we help improve decision making?
Yep.
So the first thing I think is it's that mindset of taking a product oriented approach, and then the second part of the product oriented approach, which probably doesn't get enough play. I think good products are designed when you put a huge focus on the user.
Oh, right? Absolutely.
So if I'm building an internal IT system, one of the powers that I have, is I can mandate it on my users because they're my employees. I can say, if you don't do it, you're fired, or if you don't do it, you don't get paid your bonus. And I can take care of my interests, my corporate interests. So I'm trying to maximize this. And I can force things on users. When you're building product and you're building it for someone else, we put a lot of focus on what's the job to be done. What's the job Carl is trying to do? What are the tools he needs? And how can I specifically help Carl get his job done? So the second thing is, we're taking a product oriented approach, but we're taking a very user driven approach. And so we're looking at what are the problems that we can solve with that approach that other people can't solve.
Yeah.
And what does that require? So that requires, generally, because we're an engineering firm, it requires some specialized information on the asset, how it's engineered, how it's built. It requires partnership with a client and a trust where we maybe have partnered together on their operations and we understand how things can operate, and where there's value loss occurring, and then in that situation where data can help drive things.
You said two things I want to jump on for a second, because it's fascinating. One is you said, instead of like codifying the knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And instead of being bespoke. So essentially what you're looking at is the platform sort of approach, so you can reuse it, add to it, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because what we found in the industry back in 2013, 2014, platforms were unheard of.
Yeah.
Yet they're standard in software and hardware. The other thing, I my ears perked up, my huge grin when you talked about it. It's about the user, right? So some work I did years ago. This is just as an example, with user interface design, these sort of things, heads-up displays for pilots. Yeah. We're finding out the pilots, the massive information there was just psychologically and cognitively overloading. They couldn't make decisions, and passengers were at risk. In fact, in some of the flight simulators, and I wanted to talk about modeling and simulation a little bit, some of the flight simulators, the pilots were actually, you fly the airplane 2,000 times and you put a gas truck in front of them on the airport runway, they run right into it every single time, because that user-centered design is not, it's built by engineers for engineers instead of, what do you need? What decision are you going to make? And even, it would be nice if these menus and all this sort of stuff are actually, you could modify them for the individual user and individual application versus it's standard. That's what you're doing.
It's interesting. It's interesting you say that. When one of the first products that we worked on at Hatch was an operational readiness platform. Hatch has a practice in operational readiness, and we inherited this older platform that needed to be modernized. And one of the things that's misunderstood, I think, in product development is a lot of people think it's the business needs to download the requirements on the tech guys, and the tech guys will code it up. And that's kind of the traditional model. And I think we've learned better, right? I think Steve Jobs taught us that better. And one of the early nice creative tensions that we had as we were creating this new version of this operational readiness product was our team looked at the requirements and said, you don't need 80% of this.
Yeah.
And we focused on the 20%. And we said, do you really need to do those other things? And we simplified things considerably, and the users loved it. You actually think now, when Microsoft and Apple were competing more, Apple would have a very simple experience and Microsoft would have a very complex experience. If you think of every new version of Office that comes out now, it actually has less buttons and less things.
It looks more like Apple.
Yeah. And it's exactly what you said. It's sure you can customize it and do things, but it's giving you the right information when you need it. And the thing that you do once every 3 weeks, okay, if you have to hunt a little bit for that, that's okay. But the thing that you do every day, that needs to be easy and intuitive to exercise.
And lead to better decisions. That's what it's all about.
And you talk about mining, and you talk about the commonalities between mining and other industries. One of the biggest ones is at least in a North American context or in a Western context, what's our biggest challenge right now? It's labor. We don't have enough people.
Yeah.
And it's labor productivity. How do we get more out of people? And so this trend of how do we make our people more productive? How do we make them do their jobs better? That's really important.
Well, some of the other, if you take a look at some of the other challenges in mining as well, because I love that intro there, Alim, is there's a lot. Like the pressures on the industry today are incredible. I would not want to be working as somebody running a mining company. Yeah. You've got decarbonization, your ESG, and there's new SEC regulations coming out. You've got EBITDA values going the wrong way, cycles, boom and bust sort of cycles. You mentioned people, geopolitics. Yeah. Article just came out today about the impact of mining from Putin taking over the Wagner Group. It's getting really crazy.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of pressures though. So if you take a look at, again, coming back to business decisions, there's the people side of it, of course, but there's probably an opportunity because of the discrete nature of the data that the knowledge and the data that you talked about before, to actually extract more value so the miners can make better decisions faster. Because of that discrete aspect of the data and the decision making and the business and the people. I would guess that there's some poor decisions being made, or they're being made late. Like for example, like tailings dams, right? I'm at a collision conference this week. A lot of tech startups, and there's a few of them looking at tailings dam monitoring, so you can make near real-time decisions instead of let's worry about it later.
It's interesting you talk about tailings. One of the products that we're working on is a tailings management platform, and part of it is dam monitoring, and part of it, and so you have to keep in mind I'm someone from outside of the industry. So when our team at Hatch came and said, "Oh, we need to look at this," in my head, right, the techie of me is like, "Oh, we're going to use AI to tell it when this is happening," and when we dove into the problem. One, we realized, once again, I'm saying something that's going to be obvious to someone who's been in the industry for a while. These are massively complex systems. And sure, there'll be some AI and some data and everything else. But at the end of the day, there were well-established processes that you couldn't monitor if they were being followed. Many people had to be involved in them. And the contextual information of people working on things and who was doing what when and the data of what was being done, it wasn't being shared. So when you started looking at why there was failures in tailings, it wasn't majority of the time, vast majority of the time, it wasn't an engineering failure. It was a people and process failure. And it didn't need whiz-bang AI telling you some new insight that you didn't have. It just needed people to do their jobs, there to be accountability and transparency in the job, and contextual information allowing people to collaborate in their jobs. And if you start with that, which to me is, maybe being from other industries is very, very basic. But and it's not basic. There's challenges in the mining sector that other industries don't have. You're far away. You're in hostile environments in that using it's you're not in a beautiful pristine office tower getting everything. So there's there's a lot that can be. There's a lot of potential in those areas.
So when you're doing all this work on the digital side of things, and again, I bring it up because of the conference, the Collision conference here in Toronto. There's a lot of startups. There's several of them sounds like it's doing very similar things. Is your approach, or Hatch's approach in general, do you look at startups and say, hey, that could fit into here. Let's either coach them, bring them on board, acquire them, whatever. Do you do that sort of thing too?
So part of our mandate. So we're a big sponsor of Next AI, which is a Canadian incubator or sponsor of technologies. And part of our job is we mentor companies. We look for companies to partner with. We look at companies to invest in. We made an investment a couple of years ago in a data and analytics platform company called Brainwave. We're using their platform to build products on top of that. So our view is, if there's startups in the space, we maybe want to invest in them. We maybe want to partner and build with them. But there's no shortage of problems to solve. So
exactly.
But it's the rarer thing is to find smart digital minds that are focusing on this industry. Like I think one of the tragedies of my era when I graduated was the number of really smart people that went out into the market and spent 10 years of their career trying to build better banner ads, right? Like, and maybe that's where the money was, or that's where the hype was, or whatever. There are real problems in the mining industry, the resources industry, that need to be solved to make a better world. And that's not, they're serious, these are industries that and how things are done will have a serious impact on our future. So we need more minds. We need more minds.
Yes.
Focusing on how do we use data, how do we use digital, but solving problems in the domain. So to me, when I hear about startups in the space, it's super exciting. I want to engage with them, and if they're doing something better than us, I'll bow out of it and we'll partner with them and we'll focus on a different
or the typical approach in software environment, right? If somebody's got something, adopt it, and you, like you did with Brainwave. It's funny, when I saw the Brainwave announcement, and that was just slightly after you came on board, Hatch, I thought there's a limit work now.
Yeah. No, and they're an interesting example. They were actually not focused on the mining metals space, but they have a really good platform that's really great at pulling in vast volumes of data from a variety of sources, and then operating on them very quickly and giving you geospatial views of them. And they were doing a lot of work in the consumer product goods space, helping companies identify what micro markets to go after and everything. And when we looked at it, we said, wait, there's got to be problems that we can solve in the metals industry. So think of the industry we're in. Okay, varieties of external data, high volumes of data, and the ability to process them quickly to drive insights. There's a lot of problems you can solve. Like, I was reading in the paper today about lithium battery recycling. Okay, figuring out, so if you're a lithium battery recycler, there's a lot of hardcore, engineering technology that you need to figure out how to refine the lithium. But where is the lithium? Where's your supply chain? Where are your clients? How do you better mobilize around that? How do you price? Or one of the big things we're seeing in our engineering and project management business is when you actually build, clients now don't only care about, are you on time, are you on budget? They care about, where are you procuring your materials from, and what's the carbon footprint from that? Well, how do you track that? Right? How do you know the carbon footprint of a brick? Right? How do you project and forecast that? Okay, that's a lot of external data and a lot of processing that you've got to figure out. So I think I'm excited to meet entrepreneurs in the space, but I think it's also interesting to see, like, I look at my background, I'm from outside the industry. There's a lot of learning that I'm doing, but there's also a lot of parallel problems that have been solved elsewhere.
Well, and that's, I loved when you said that as well, because what I wanted to jump on, because I'm a firm believer that there's a lot of stuff, technology or problems that have already been solved or whatever that just need to be adopted. You mentioned Brainwave. They were looking at consumer. They weren't even looking at mining, but this problem of data aggregation and business insights was the same. A couple of startups I was talking to they're in ag, cement, and forestry.
Yeah.
using satellite imagery for
Yeah.
monitoring stuff. What about mining? What are the problems they have? There's these companies outside of mining actively looking at mining because the trend we're starting to see and hear from are the non-mining stakeholders. Like typically mining looks at just mining, right? And your stakeholders are your community and your shareholders and that sort of thing. But the downstream now, the tech companies, tech investors are all saying, what's this mining stuff?
Yeah.
Maybe we should be looking at mining and solving some problems. Maybe we should looking at mining and helping develop some technology. So I'm curious to dive into that a little bit more about your thoughts on the relevance of technology or people outside of mining to solve mining challenges, digital or otherwise.
So when I think of the team that I'm building right now, it's probably 50-50.
Yeah.
And maybe over time it'll veer a little bit more towards having more people from the industry. But I think we've got to bring in some outside discipline in thinking, specifically for me around productization.
Yeah.
And that product-oriented thinking, and the use of data, and the use of platform architectures.
Yes.
And that's that's been, for us, a lot of, as we started standing up the team, initially it didn't look like the progress we were making seemed kind of slow. It's like, oh, that's all you've done. And now we're starting to see an acceleration because we took time to build the right building blocks that could be reused over and over again. And that's a little bit novel in this space.
Well, and you said something before that kind of aligns with that. I'm trying to connect a couple of dots here. Is the bespoke nature. Let's build a custom piece of software to solve a problem for mining, for mining, by mining, right? And the discrete data aspect, and what we're seeing as well in some cases is that the data is actually tied up with a vendor OEM hardware platform, so it's actually harder to grab that sort of data. There's been startups that have actually built devices to plug into buses of trucks to get the data and make it available to the operators. But in terms of building platforms and looking at things that are relevant to the entire industry, data access,
it's one of the areas that other industries have. I don't want to say cracked. It's an issue everywhere, but have progressed a lot further. The amount of data right now that sits in bespoke vendors' data platforms, and it's difficult to access, or you can access it, but you're writing a custom API to access it, and then the vendor modifies their this and that, and you're like the amount of overhead associated with that. It's a lot,
and the errors associated with doing that.
Yes, and the reliability and everything. So I think in greenfield situations, I think companies need to rethink their traditional IT/OT approach.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of newer thinking and newer architectures and approaches that you can take. I think the at-scale cloud providers that have played a bigger role in other industries have a bigger role to play in mining. And people talk about things are remote, but they've now got edge computing and other things. I think when you think about things from a digital perspective, I remember early in my days in financial services, we used to spend 90% of our time talking about this topic.
Yeah.
Oh, you've got the system, and it's a Corba interface, and we're trying to get it to this, and how do you get COM and Corba to talk to each other? And you'd have these experts that were experts at getting interfaces to talk to each other and making things hum. You don't talk a lot about it. And then we saw various iterations and web services and things moved and everything. Now, if you're doing work in a lot of those industries, you spend very little time talking about how do I get system A to talk to system B. You spend a lot more time talking about business and value.
Extracting
and
the
extracting.
value.
I think the technologies in mining have come, the IT digital technologies have come a long way. I think we need to take new architecture approaches to things. In brownfield situations, there's also some disruptive technologies that are very good at, pinpointing the data that you need and pulling the right data and putting it in some sort of a structure. But that requires, that's where some of the at-scale IT providers are not equipped to help. Because to do that, if you're going to pinpoint and pull certain types of data that you need to solve a problem and solve it somewhere, you have to know what the data means.
Yes. Context, as you said
And
earlier.
context matters. Yeah. And certain industries are harder than others. So if you and I, Carl, and I'm not a retail expert, I don't think you're a retail expert,
No.
but if we decide we were going to start up a business in retail, we could probably figure it out.
Yeah.
Right? Not that it doesn't have its own complexities, but we've been consumers our whole lives. Probably the same thing in financial services. There's a little bit of math and some complexity. But oh my gosh, if you're not from a mining background and you don't have a chemical engineering degree and you decide that we're going to dabble and do IT consulting and mining, it's hard unless you have a client that's willing to put a lot of domain expertise into you. So if you want to have, in brownfield situations, if you want to have efficient data approaches that don't require you to do a total data revamp or write things that are so kludgy that they take a lot to maintain. You need to have strong domain expertise, and that to me is one of the things I thought we could achieve and bring to life at Hatch because we had that and we had the client
and mix that. You've got the mix. You've got the outside people who know how to do the digital side. Plus you have the domain expertise. That's the marriage made in heaven, as it were. Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, really cool. You said something else when we were talking about data and platforms and everything else and access to data and extracting data. And in the automotive industry, for example, like there's whole groups of people working on automation and data and everything else. And most of these groups, it's like Mercedes and Volkswagen, all these large companies are all working on open source systems in their vehicles.
Yeah.
Look at Tesla. It's open source. In mining, we actually had, it was really funny. This is hilarious. We had it was funny for me. I used to say I'm not from mining, but having been with CMIC for 10 years, that's probably not true anymore. But we had the head of the Eclipse Foundation talk at one of our forums once, and the reaction in the audience, and he equated open source to mining. It was beautiful the way it was done, and used automotive as an example. Yeah. And the reaction from the audience was mixed. Half the audience said, this is useless, we can't use it, it's a waste of time, you can't make money. And the other half was curious and said, yeah, we should take a look at this. Yeah. And this is only a few years ago. Yeah. Like it's a little scary. So I'm just thinking about if you want to connect the data in some sort of democratized sort of fashion across the value chain of the business, is something like an open source platform something that is necessary? I'm just asking this because I'm not the expert.
So I think certainly open standards and a certain amount of open source has a role to play. And I'm going to use a non-digital example because it's current and it's in the news. So if you and I run competing car companies and we're both trying to roll out the new electric car, does it help us or hurt us to have an open standard for chargers, or should we have our proprietary standards? So I could argue and say, well, no, I want my own because mine's better, and Carl can figure it out himself. Well, wait, if I have 10, 20% of the market and I can only charge at 1 out of every 5 stations, are more people likely to buy electric cars, or is that something that we should collaborate on? Yeah. And should we compete on the fact that, I don't know, my engine's better than yours, or
the other value better, in the vehicle?
So you have to choose where when we standardize, does that create an opportunity for us to have a bigger market? And those are the areas where we should be looking at open source. So if we're two mining companies and we're all dealing with the same proprietary vendors, does it help us or hurt us if the data standards are open? Yeah. They probably need to be open. There probably needs to be more openness, and we need to insist that things move in that direction. Okay, now if I have a proprietary model of how I refine nickel or coal or whatever it is, I probably shouldn't share that with you because that's my competitive advantage, and that might hurt my market share if I'm able to drive things. So you have to kind of go through and say, what are the things that would behoove us as an industry, and things would move faster if they were open and standard. And I think in one case, I think the proprietary OEMs and how they hold on to their data, and that there isn't more of an insistence on common data standards and other things. I think it hurts progress and it hurts the industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that kind of, when you're talking about the value of when you need something common and proprietary, that comes back to what you talked about platforms. If you're building platforms collectively, you could use that sort of approach, and then the value you're going to create as a company is how you modify, change, deploy, build whatever, or the financial model around, business model around how you're going to deploy that platform. That's no, it's cool. I was kind of curious. Now, you talked about AI. AI is a buzzword. Like it's been around. I actually did my graduate degree in pattern recognition years ago. So I'm by no means anywhere near being an expert, but I'm always curious about this stuff. And I just, your thoughts on AI. What actually how do you interpret AI? What is it? No, seriously, because I asked somebody that this morning. They said, well, it's fuzzy neurologic. Well, is it really, or is it genetic algorithm? What is it? When people are talking about AI, in your words, Alim, what do you see AI as being? Because you used it before. We're going to use AI to make decisions. What do you see?
One, I think it's a very broad marketing term.
Yeah,
that's overused right now, and to a point where I think it's not always helpful.
Yes.
And so, when I think about maybe what are the applications of AI, I would break it down into a few different areas in the mining sector in a way that's helpful. So certain, like artificial intelligence, if you take, like, it's been here for a long time.
Yeah. It's not new.
It's been here for a long time. What's changed?
Yeah.
Right? Our processing power has changed, and the amount of data that we have has changed. And so, okay, so what are the problems that are now solvable that were not solvable before? And I'll give you an example of something that 5 years ago we'd have all said, wow, that's amazing. And now it's just,
routine.
I think of it as nothing more than a sensor. So image recognition. Yeah. Right? Our ability to go and say, this is an Evian bottle, or this is a water bottle. Yeah. Okay, maybe not. Maybe 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, that would have been like, wow, the computer was able to tell that this was a water bottle
in 3 days of computing,
right? And now that's standard. Yeah. So when you talk about AI in mining, for instance, image recognition, right? You're underground, you don't have people there, you're trying to monitor different discrete events that are occurring. There's applications of AI. Yeah. I don't think it's productive to say applications of AI in that context. I think we should say there's computer vision recognition system.
Exactly.
And that's not an application. That's a sensor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So we've created a sensor that can tell, how many times the shovel put dirt into a bucket. Great. That's interesting. Did it use artificial intelligence? Were there neural networks? And yes, but who cares?
Doesn't matter.
Right?
It's a decision or accounting.
It's a decision. Yeah. So I look at something like that and say, okay, there's some maturity around that. Yeah. You can now train these vision-based systems to recognize certain events. Okay, I view that as a sensor. The interesting thing is now that we know there's a water bottle on the table, right? Or the truck has put X number of buckets of dirt in the receptacle. And it did it 10 times, but yesterday it did it 12 times. Okay, why is there a difference? What does it mean? Yeah. Those are the systems when you go and you say, okay, so now how do you bring people together around that information? What are the decisions that we need to make better? How do we improve productivity? That's interesting. Yeah. To me.
And of value too to the company.
Yeah. So the other area where I think there's a lot of people talk also a lot about machine learning. And actually, when I came into this industry, I was like, oh, there's data, we're going to do machine learning and everything. I actually think one of the biggest opportunities in the mining space is around machine learning. But before you even get to that, there's a whole host of problems as we dive. And the reason I think it's machine learning is applicable, if you think of the complexity, specifically in some of the assets, right, the processing assets, the number of variables that there are, the ore grade, the temperature, this condition, that condition, and the ability to look at that data and look at outcomes and calibrate to that, I think that's hugely powerful. And there's a lot of opportunity, and because incremental improvements can drive such a big financial return, that's a super exciting area to explore. Now, I think there's a lot of before you do that, there's a lot of things that can be done. Like we're one of the areas we're exploring right now is we're building digital twins, which I know everybody talks about digital twins, but we're building process twins for Hatch Technologies. So for some of our our furnaces in the metal space, and as we started looking and going through the exercise of where's value lost, one of the things that I learned is there's a lot of opportunities to apply first principle models.
Yes.
That are in people's heads or on their notebooks and everything that aren't being applied. So before you go and do all this crazy machine learning, wait, let's take what's in the postdoc's head who's been doing it for 50 years. Let's actually see how we can apply those models, apply different models, and then you can look at machine learning to tweak it and see if you can get better and everything. So I think there's a big opportunity around machine learning. Sorry, one other thing. I think that when you take a step back from process twins and you look at system twins, there's also an opportunity for AI. But before you get there, how about do some modeling? How about do some simulation? How about do some optimization? There's all those other data techniques that you can get to before you get to AI.
And they're all encompassed in what I'm seeing is everybody's throwing this under the umbrella of AI as a marketing play and everything else. And funny, a number of startups I was talking to this week were saying, we're adding AI to our platform or our technology or our software. It's like, whatever. But something you just said was really, really curious because you tied the start of the conversation to where we are now. AI, the discrete nature, and digital twins. So it's really, I find it amusing in some cases. The industry's come a long way in just a couple of years, but I've asked a couple of people, what do you mean by digital twin? And some of the experts in the industry couldn't describe it. They couldn't describe what it is. And what I was really interested, Alim, in what you said was the discrete nature of the digital twins, right? Because ideally, I'm just going to hypothesize on something because we talked about business decisions and how things are discrete and not connected. If you take a look at the aerospace industry, we mentioned this before, they design, build, and fly an airplane thousands of times before they spend a cent on a rivet. The mining industry, we don't do that, right? We don't really do that. So I'm just kind of curious, is there an opportunity in your mind to take this discrete nature of the business and the discrete digital twins and actually start connecting them? Like it comes down to connecting the data layer, connecting the twins, so you can actually get to a place where you're operating a mine and new technology comes in. It's kind of like BIM in buildings, right? Business information modeling, that sort of thing. You can feed it back to change and refine your models and all these sorts of things. One senior executive in the industry I talked to about 5 years ago, he was really excited by this because his approach was, and we want to bring in financial data and financial markets into our models to actually make better business decisions. So I'm kind of curious where you think your experience, but also what Hatch is doing on the digital twin. Is this a place the industry can go?
So short answer is yes and absolutely. When I first joined Hatch, though, one of my pet peeve terms that I would hear was digital twin. I thought it was way overused. And in my experience, when we built digital twins before I came into Hatch and I'd seen them built, I thought they all fell into two categories. And I'm not a skeptic anymore, so I'm sharing my evolution. But I am a skeptic to a lot of the digital twins that are out there. I either thought there was a lot of digital twins that deployed quickly and added very little value, or there was a lot of digital twins that just cost a ridiculous amount of money. And I didn't. Once again, kind of like AI, I thought it was a market. There was meaning underneath it, but it was being thrown out as a marketing
cost more money than value it produced.
And one of the big things we're doing in Hatch right now is actually focusing on digital twins. But we've sat down, we've broken it up, and we like to say there's 4 types of twins. The first one is you have an analytics twin. Which, you have an asset or even a system of assets, and you're exposing data in the around the asset. That's important, right? When we talk about integrated operations and people making decisions, you need to have the data that you need in that moment. and not saying that's not high value, but when you talk about digital twins, to me, that's the lowest. Like
Yeah.
the number of videos I've seen where an engineering plant gets designed and, oh, the worker can go up and with their phone, see the information, manual or see the parts, like awesome. Good.
Yeah.
Like good. That's a data exercise.
Yeah.
And it's an information management exercise and great that they show it on whatever VR glasses, but the value is that it's information at your fingertips.
Yeah.
And not that there's no value in that. That's not earth-shattering value, and it makes a good video. But that's the first piece. Then we say, okay, there's an asset twin, where when you're actually working with an asset, and specifically around preventive maintenance,
Yeah.
right? Hey, I need to understand. I've got lots of assets deployed. I've downtime hurts me. If I have a little bit more information around how that asset is performing, and maybe it's wear and tear, I can prevent it from being maintained, or I can deploy my maintenance resources, effectively, or I can keep the appropriate number of spare parts and all of those things. So there's that aspect, and there's a lot of value around
absolutely.
that. But be aware there's a specific type of problem that you're solving. So
just to interject for a second, Alim, the aerospace industry was working on that 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's been deployed 20 years ago.
Yeah. So don't get me wrong; these are important problems to solve. But going and saying, rolling out digital twins, okay, like what's the problem that you're solving?
Exactly.
Let's kind of like the AI thing. Let's do AI in mining. Wait, what does that mean? What's the problem we're solving? Yeah. Right? Okay, we have data and we have processing power. If you increase both, what are the problems that allows us to say the same? So to me, it's a lot more productive than talking about twins to go and say, okay, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? So now, and in Hatch, we actually, around our furnaces, we built an analytics twin that was a data that provides the data to the operators and everything. It's important. You need it. To me, the more interesting twins are in two spaces. One is when you have complex assets. How do you build a process twin around that? Yeah. So when you have a furnace, right? Very high temperatures, corrosive conditions inside, and it's your main asset that's driving processing, and you're losing value. And operators are making decisions. Where are the places they're losing value? And if you can add some data to the mix, intuit some data, and you have some models, can you help inform better decisions? And that's super interesting. To me. Okay, so now take that concept. You've got a process twin around an asset. Okay, now you've got a system and I know you're passionate about this. You've got a system of assets that work together, and you've got a system twin. That's another area that's interesting to me. So, and to me, there's a varying degree of maturities across system twins.
100%.
So I can go and say, I have a system of assets, and I don't have process twins for each one.
Yeah.
But I understand how things are flowing from asset to asset. Okay, we can model that. How do we optimize that? So one of the problem areas that we're solving a lot is helping optimize smelters and helping drive that. And that requires you to build a system twin.
Yep.
And there's all sorts of different problems that come into play that you can help solve and with different techniques up to AI, right? Simulation, optimization and everything. But now you can mature that system twin as you start building process twins for the more complicated assets that live in that. And then, but in all of those twins, like when we build our process or system twins, we don't sit down and say, we're building a twin. We start looking and saying, okay, let's look at the piece of the value chain that's in our domain, and where is value being lost?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yep. And it's normally not me in the room saying where is value being lost. It's our pyrometallurgists or hydrometallurgists,
exactly.
Sitting down, and there's chemistry equations everywhere, and you come up with where's all the value being lost. Quantify those value losses. Then you sit down and say, with digital people, and you say, where do we think there's solutions to prevent that value loss? Sometimes it's first principle. Sometimes it's our guys saying, wait, is there data to, we can drive things?
Yeah.
And then you start whittling down saying, what can we actually solve? And when you have those things, you say, is there a value case to build something around this?
And I think the other thing about value as well, in some of the conversations that we've had, is not necessarily value lost, because there is value lost, but there's also, when you're doing these system sort of approaches, the value that hasn't been realized, that you don't know you've left on the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like I'll give a perfect example of this. And again, it comes back to the discrete nature of the system is ore sorting. right? Ore sortings are data intensive as well, but also a lot of complexities around it, sensor based and all those sorts of things. In my mind, in our mind, the best place in, say, in an underground mine, the best place to stick ore sorting is at the face, right? Yet most of the industry is sticking it in front of the met plant. And one person I talked to said, we've got the value we wanted. And I asked them, I said, what about the value lost? What do you mean? Yeah. Well, what if it was underground at the face? It won't work. Why wouldn't it work? How do we make it work?
Yeah.
What's the value you could accrue if you did it there and say left half your tailings underground or half your material underground or whatever? It's the value that you're not realizing. Because I think the whole idea of the digital twins, the system twins, the 4 different twins you gave, and AI, whatever you want to call it, is realizing a lot more value that you've never even knew existed or suspected but couldn't prove it.
Yeah, exactly.
And didn't have enough backing to make that decision.
Yeah,
right.
And it's funny that you're kind of coming to the crux of where I think there's opportunity. One is how do you equip people with data to make better decisions, and then how do you have the computer crunch the data and maybe give you some insights that you didn't have. And then I like to joke, like sometimes when you come from outside of the industry, you can ask dumb questions and come across being, as brilliant. You don't have like, you can say, why are you storing this here and not there? Maybe that's obvious to everyone else, but it gives you license to ask questions.
We're twins
like
in that way.
Yeah.
Not digital over.
Yeah.
No, that was really cool. I just lost my train of thought here. But you said we're at the crux of the problem. But again, to get to that system sort of twin, and when I say system, it's end to end from geology to closure. How far away are we from doing that, do you think? And do you think it's I know it's possible, but how far away? What do we need to do to break that down?
One, it is possible.
Yeah.
And I don't think we could do it very easily, but what would the value be that you'd get out of it? So exactly. I think what. So yes, I think there's value in stitching together the whole value chain. But I think that's similar to going and saying there's value in doing a data transformation, putting all of your possible data that you ever have in a data lake. I think the more interesting value is to look at where in that value chain, what are those high value interfaces?
Yeah.
And I think there's, if I had to prioritize the problem, rather than going broad, I would identify those high value interfaces and go deep and solve those well, and then expand
from there.
From there. So like I gave the example, one of the areas we're investing in is a twin for nickel PGM furnaces. Okay, let's get that right. And let's get it, let's improve, let's allow operators to get more out of that. Wait, now you've got an asset twin. Okay. What are the interfaces that touch that?
The connectivity.
And so I think rather than going broad first, I would go deep. Now, doing that requires modern data platforms so that you're not, sometimes if you don't have a good data approach and you just solve a point problem, okay, then you've got to go through a whole data exercise to get the next piece. If you set things up correctly with the right modern data approaches, then you're just solving use cases.
Yeah.
Right. So it requires the right architecture and thinking.
So on that, I don't know if you can answer this because I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can answer. But you say high value in your mind and what you've seen so far. Have you got can you share what you think may be the high value place to start, or are you working on that now and it's proprietary?
So now I'm going to play my, I'm still a newbie in the mining industry and I'm learning that. So
that actually, you said that before. That's really important, Alim, because you asked different questions that are actually more important than the expert who's had tunnel vision.
So one of the areas I was asking a colleague this in the same space, saying, okay, because when I came in, I was like, what problem? Like, what problems? What are the big problems? And someone gave me the advice and said, look, when you look at the mining industry, and they simplified it for me. They said, you dig a big hole and you've got an amount of ore that you've got to drive it. There's a business case around it.
Yeah.
And if you and I have separate minds, our investors have backed different business cases, and our job is to perform to that business case or exceed it.
Yeah.
Typically in these facilities, then you're processing, and there's a large single asset that has hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of investment in. Focus on the biggest asset and focus on getting that producing well.
Yeah.
And if you get that right, not that there's not a lot of other problems, but that's a good starting point. So I'm operating on that assumption, which is, right now, and it hasn't been proven wrong. To me, there's a huge subset of problems that you solve around that. Start with the most critical kind of asset in things, then move outward.
Yeah.
And then the second piece is a topic we talked a lot about in the earlier part of our conversation. I do think without whiz-bang technology, there is just an element of a lot of people working across the value chain that aren't collaborating and don't have contextualized data. And I think there's a series of problems that don't require first principle models. It's just about really looking at the people and process and getting them the information that they work on. So one of the other areas outside of products that I've put a lot of focus on is around integrated operations and IROCs.
Yeah.
So we've built a fairly significant IROC practice. I think it's a world leading IROC practice. And there's not a ton of productization in our side on that. It's a lot of methodology, it's a lot of thinking, and it's a lot of approach. Because my view is if you get the IT/OT infrastructure, the system landscape right, the IROC becomes your operating system.
Yep.
And then the other things we're talking about become applications that sit inside of that. And to me, yes, an IROC or an integrated operations approach, it's a data and it's a digital approach, but it's equally a people and process approach. And if you get that, so if you have the underlying infrastructure right, you get the operating system, and you get people collaborating correctly, then you can build applications that sit inside of that, that fall under these kind of twins that we've been talking about.
One of the most interesting IROCs I saw, it was a demonstration at a conference about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was fascinating for me because it circles back to part of our conversation before, it was the first case that I had seen where the people that built the IROC, the person leading the project came from the aerospace industry, and they had a psychologist and a cognitive scientist to help build the interfaces. Yeah. Are you using those same sort of approaches?
Actually, it's funny you say that. When our leader, who's leading our IROC practice, when he put his strategy deck together and he was looking at, okay, where do we look for inspiration? NASA's approach was the first place, and then we put a lot of focus across our entire digital practice in user experience. A couple of our head of strategies actually from one of the world's leading digital agencies. Our head of product is from that, and they spend a lot of time thinking of user psychology and that piece. And I want to say I learned that in our background working with Wall Street traders.
Yeah.
Right. That the data would show up on their screen. You didn't get any kudos for that. No matter how hard that was to make happen, that was table stakes. But you move a button from to the wrong place, or something is not visually obvious to them. Yeah. Oh my gosh, you've got a lot of 4-letter words thrown at you.
It's easy to get the data in front of you.
Yeah.
It's hard and frustrating when you move it, when you have to push too many buttons to get that data in front of you. Yeah. It's all about what we see and perceive as human beings. Yeah. And it's funny, I was saying around that we've been using for a number of years. It's not about the technology.
Yeah.
It's about the people. And you said the same thing.
Absolutely.
So, and something else, part of this conversation too, which is interesting, is if you take a look at, you use the term whiz-bang technology, right? I love it. But if you take a look at some of the topics we've been talking about, if you take a look at those sort of things, like the whether it's the software algorithms, like neural networks and stuff, AI, that's not new. The first paper in the backpropagation algorithm came out in the 70s, for God's sake. And the guy who wrote it, co-authored it, lives in Toronto, which most people don't know. He was speaking at the conference here today. But a lot of that stuff already exists. We talked about lots of data that are coming off machines, and I like what you said, Alim. You don't need all the data, and that's stuff like system on chip, so you can actually do pre-processing on chips. So you're not getting you don't want all the raw data. You want to pre-process it, right? And there's some of the analog digital converters already do that, but you need at a different level to get the metadata almost to start. We talked about psychology and cognitive engineering, and even some of the models that you use in the financial businesses and digital and everything else already exists. And that's kind of marrying old with new, right? Like old as in mining industry with new, which is technology. Yeah. And it's almost, I noticed we both have these remarkable tablets.
Yes.
Right? It's
I think we should say this podcast is sponsored by Remarkable, yeah.
We'll have to go talk to them. Yeah. No, but the interesting thing about this is it does exactly that.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're bringing in, like, people recognize you learn by handwriting. You don't learn by typing. You learn by handwriting. That's where it comes in. Yeah. And by using technology to do this, you learn, and you can do things that are intuitive, but you can still save it and use it digitally instead of having piles of, in my case, legal pads or the binders. Yeah,
precisely. Right? And I think, and I don't want to de-emphasize my own excitement around technologies like AI, and I think we're certainly working on them, and they have a place. I think the bigger innovation right now, though, in the mining industry, and what we're trying to bring to life in Hatch, the hard part, it's the disciplines coming together.
Yes,
absolutely. Right? And so that, and I actually find some of these overcharged marketing words end up being turnoffs and inhibitors for collaboration. So if I talk to my colleagues at Hatch and I'm like, ChatGPT and large language models, and we got to do this, and it's going to change the world, they turn me off. Yeah. And they might like, that's really interesting, but I don't understand that. Yeah. And so I think if we look at how we drive change in the industry, we've got to focus on what are the problems that we're going to solve. Yes. What are the problems that we're going to solve, and what are the techniques to solve them, and how can data help? How can computing power help? How do we organize people? How are we aware of people's jobs? Yep. And how are we aware of their processes? And if you start with those things, and you can then introduce these techniques to help, and those are more useful approaches.
No, absolutely. And what you said before about the people in different disciplines, getting them to work together. Yeah. Because if you look at it, if you look at the disciplines mining typically focus on, there's some people with PhDs in computer science are joining mining companies. That's all good, and people are building companies are building analytics teams. That's all good. But in general, they go to mining schools. Yeah. And how many mining schools work with a computer science department or the systems engineering department? Zero. Yeah. Zero. Yeah. There's a fundamental problem going backwards. Yeah. And then if you want to recruit somebody from with a computer science or systems engineering degree or a electrical engineering degree, whatever it is, a non-traditional discipline, you're competing with Google and Apple. Yeah. There's a really, really neat example on a project we did a couple of years ago. It was fascinating. It was really fascinating. A friend of mine a colleague friend of mine who ran the center, we chuckled about it. So it was with a company looking at oil, just simple analytics. Yeah. To crankcase oil and transmission oil in big trucks, right? Okay. We have lots of data. It's going to be hard. And rather than going to the high-priced consultant that was $500,000 to do that stuff, we went to a university group that has all of the software and the postdocs and the PhDs with all this experience. Spent a couple of days talking to the engineers in the mining company, and in a couple of days, basically had the work done. It took longer to negotiate the contract than it did to actually come up with the results. But the really, really fascinating thing about this, there are two things come out of this. And they weren't even targeted. And this is the whole power of taking a look at extracting knowledge from data. Let's find out, we don't know what we don't know, right? Yeah. And the interesting thing that came out of that was the maintenance schedule for the two oils one was 5,000 kilometers, one was 10,000, right? So you take the truck off 10,000 kilometers, you change that oil. You wouldn't change the other one. You'd schedule them separately, even though it's scheduled to come off at the same time. You'd schedule it separately. Yeah. So there's 33% savings in just identifying that and recognizing that they also found that you could actually extend the life of this one oil by 3,000 or 4,000 kilometers. So you can actually do it all at once. So the savings there is massive. But the point I was making is that by doing some fundamental analysis on these discrete data sets, you can actually learn quite a bit about what I like to call the interrelationships between data that you don't know there's an interrelationship, or there are insights you're going to extract from it that you're not aware of.
Yeah.
Right? Just because it's the way we've done it, the way our process works, the way our system works. So you know the process, you can then challenge, because you said process. You can then challenge the process because the data doesn't prove it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a lot of cool things here. Yeah. And the really, really funny thing too, and I'm kind of curious about this. This is kind of going backwards a little bit, but several people I've talked to have said, "Oh, I have a terabyte of data. I don't know what to do with it." That's nothing.
Yeah.
No, this is seriously.
Yeah.
I have a terabyte of plant data, or somebody else. I've got a petabyte of data. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
That is not a problem.
Yeah.
There's other industry have been working with this for decades. Yeah. Decades. Yeah. So would you agree with that statement? Like, it's not a big deal. Processing power now is...
It's, yeah. I think the bigger challenge is, what are you going to do with the data, and what does the data mean?
Yeah.
Right? We put a lot of emphasis on data, or the amount of data. And this is a perspective of someone coming from a digital background who thinks the digital pieces are easy and the other parts are hard. So to me, the hard part's not how do you store the data, how do you process the data. The hard part is, what does that data mean?
Yes.
And so how do you extract meaning from that data, and what's the expertise you need to be able to do that, and what problems does that data allow you to solve?
Yeah. And on that, because you talked about the way Hatch is set up, it's about 50-50, digital plus domain expertise, right? So I'm curious about your thoughts on this. Again, this is more curiosity than anything else, is that we're hearing that, you have to have domain expertise, basically defining how you're going to analyze, like hand in hand, before you go and do some whatever analytics by non-domain experts. But does that inject a bias? Potentially inject a bias?
I think it's so my view is it's coming up with the right balance. So,
yes, exactly. Yeah.
You know, and pulling disciplines together, it's not easy.
No. Right?
So it's a lot easier to work with people that come from the same domain and think like you.
Yeah.
And so when you build a team and you're bringing in people from different backgrounds and different cultures and different domains, it creates a lot more tension, and on the surface it reduces efficiency. So what I always look and I say, if there's a problem that I could have solved in the mining space with my old company, Hatch shouldn't be solving it.
Yeah, yeah.
And if there's a problem that Hatch could solve without me, they should solve it without me. It's that mix of, like, part of the advantage of what attracted me to Hatch was the deep domain expertise and client trust. Yeah. When you combine that with digital, what can you drive? And part of that, that creation process, it is the tension. It is the people challenging each other. It is the having the patience for someone asking the stupid question, which we often do. And then it's working through that. So I think it's figuring out the right combination of that.
No, you said two things that sparked two questions, actually, or one thing that sparked two questions. One is, you just said that if this digital company could do it, Hatch shouldn't. Is there a risk that companies outside of mining, in your mind, that companies outside of mining are going to take a look at mining and say, in terms of the digital space, well, we can do that ourselves? Is there a risk of disrupting, for example, the current entrenched leaders in this space in mining?
I hope so.
Yeah, thank you.
I think right now the barriers to entry to solving some of the problems we're solving are quite high.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'll come to that in a second. I think there's a whole host of problems. You talked about the open source piece and the standardization of data and everything. Quite frankly, I don't want to make money doing that.
No.
I wish it was solved. I wish other people did move into the space and everything. I want to focus on the parts of the industry that are hard, that require deep domain expertise combined with digital, right? But No, I wish, like it's like we talked about earlier, I wish there were more startups in our space.
Yeah.
I wish there were more people that were capable of working in there. The competition will be good. It'll solve some of the more mundane problems. It'll push people to move and everything. So I hope there are more entrants into the field. Now, are there areas that I think only Hatch can solve that other people will move into? Yeah, but that's how the market works, right?
Exactly.
Whatever your high margin work is today will be low margin tomorrow, and you have to keep innovating and
You have to be
focusing
ahead
on areas.
of the curve.
So that it doesn't worry me at all. It excites me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Quantum computing. Quantum computing is all over the place. It's we've got quantum computers are now available. IBM's got them. They're out in Vancouver. And they can do data analytics much faster because the way they work. I'm just kind of curious, from your perspective, do you see a future of quantum computing in mining? Like, should we be taking a look at this stuff now?
And it's been a few months since I've read the latest on quantum computing. I think there are 3 technologies that are going to absolutely change our world when they mature. And I think one of them is getting a lot of hype right now. I think the advances in AI and all the attention that's being given to AI with ChatGPT and large language models. I actually don't think that's overhyped. I actually think that's going to fundamentally change a lot of things, and I'm talking about in the world, not just mining.
It started to change.
Yeah. And I know it's massively changed the way I work and I behave and everything. The second one is fusion power.
Oh yeah.
Right? When energy becomes, a lot cheaper and cleaner and
commoditized
and more ubiquitous. And then the third one is actually quantum computing. And I know there's quantum computers out there and that can do things, but when we think of the progress of the silicon computer, we're still kind of, maybe in the quantum computer, like we're still in the equivalent of the 1970s.
Yeah.
Wait till we get to the 1980s. I think those 3 things are going to change everything. And that imagine what that processing power can do to AI.
Oh my God.
So it's hard for me. So yes, it'll absolutely speed up analytic models and everything. I think it's going to do a lot of other things, like and everything. So I think those 3 things are gonna, and the confluence of a couple of those things will change things.
The confluence of AI to quantum to energy, like it's
Can you imagine right now,
change.
like if you could reduce for AI models the training speed or the training processing required? I was actually, just before here, I was having lunch with a colleague at Microsoft, and he was talking about, as Microsoft goes into its next fiscal year, making a lot of investments in AI, but they're prioritizing their investments because of the GPU shortage. Right, and they're not sure. Especially as they enable Copilot on the Office platform. What's the demand going to do to GPUs? Well, you're still like, up until now, we talked about how much processing power is increased. We might start actually running into limitations based on our ambitions and what's possible. So, if you have quantum computers and you have it breaks that ceiling. And so I haven't really thought about that in the context of mining, just because I think those technologies as they come out are going to be so world changing that we need to.
Well, it's interesting too. You talked about the limitations, restrictions. Are we going to run at a GPU? If you take a look at just the Chat GPT, for example, right? If you've got your own account and log in, you're already out of processing power on the platform they're using now. You've got to wait sometimes. So we're showing that exceeding now, and it's just starting to become popular. What happens when it becomes ubiquitous? We don't have the platform. We don't have the power unless some of these data mining farms go under and we take all those GPUs and start using those.
We'll stop mining for Bitcoin and.
Well, and the other thing too, I'm a huge advocate on looking at things differently and trying to get people to look at problems differently and even systems. One of the conversations we had with IBM a number of years ago, we had an IBM summit. It was here it was in Markham. And there was the executives from IBM around the world, and we're talking about what's next, right? They're data farms and all this. And one of the questions we asked was, what about the design of the computer? Like if you take a look at the design of the current computer, it hasn't fundamentally changed. It's got smaller. You've still got a chip. That's whatever size. You're still squeezing more stuff onto or coming to Moore's law. But if you people always look at mining and say, well, you haven't really advanced. Well, yeah, this processing power has, but your design hasn't.
That's funny. You're hitting me. I'm about a quarter of the way through a book which you'd enjoy called Chip War.
Chip War, yeah.
And it's covering that whole period. The invention of the semiconductor, Moore's law, the founding of Fairfield semiconductors, Intel. And you're right. And actually, we're just at the part where they're coming up with the concept that having a reusable computer instead of a
recyclable computer.
Instead of a specific computer for every problem and relying on the software level. But it's been a huge feat of engineering. I think one of the biggest feats of the past 50, 60 years is the ability to shrink transistors on chips. So not taking anything away from that, what's next?
Well, exactly. And there was a couple of things that came out of that. And again, part of this discussion, we're looking at energy pull from large data farms. So the question was, why don't you design a chip or design a computer that has net zero energy? What would that look like? So change that. As we run into Moore's law or get there, quantum is going to potentially change that. We think, we're not sure. Let's see if we can accelerate quantum so you don't have to worry about these things. And the power draw is I think, is less. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in that sort of stuff. But all this stuff it's starting to collide, right, and come together, which is it's really cool, really exciting, really cool to see. The thing is, they all connect. If you look at it, all of it connects together. All of it connects together, and the opportunity in mining is absolutely phenomenal. What's really key, and I'm going to hammer on this again, is that I'm seeing, and I'm sure you're seeing this too, we're seeing more startups in the digital space that are asking the questions about what's this mining stuff? Come and talk to me, right? Which is really exciting to see, because that's an issue, right? The issue, you said people, hiring the people, well, let's get them coming to us.
Well, and it's interesting the way the narrative in the world has changed, right? Before, even me growing up, I would never have thought I'd be in the mining space, right? Like mining was, and even until 5-6 years ago, it's coal, it's dirty, it's this, it's that. Wait, now it's lithium and it's cobalt and it's electric cars and it's electrification and we need to figure out a way to do that, and that's a limiting factor. And if we can't do that well, we can't have the future that we want.
And part of that is the discourse or the marketing or the pitch of what mining is about. You know, people say, what business you? I don't say mining. We're not in the mining business. We're in the transformation business. And mining is in the planetary transformation business. That's what mining is about. And the more people understand that,
I think, and one of my hopes, because it was eye-opening for me to be in this industry, is that I hope there's a certain naivety, I think, that people have about we live our lives and it's easy to criticize certain industries, but I don't know, you want a car battery, you better like mining. You like steel, you better like you better like mining, and we better work and put our best brains into figuring out how do we do it in a way that's clean and sustainable, otherwise there's not much of a future.
Well, and if you take a look at that too, if you take a look at mining is one end of the supply chain down to like an Apple computer or an IBM or whoever, AMD, Intel, who builds chips. If you take a look at the impact downstream, like the monetization of the aluminum, the silicon, all the stuff for mining is trillions of times more than the miners get. There's a couple of interesting people that are looking at that problem. Right, we're getting criticized for it, and you're making all the money. There's an inverse relationship here. But as I said before, these downstream folks are starting to get closer, which is comforting and scary at the same time, and hopeful. Right? So it's kind of cool. Alim, this has been absolutely fabulous.
This was a lot of fun.
This conversation.
This was great.
As two people who are non-miners,
I know we talked about a lot of. We'll see what the viewers the viewers think.
Well, there's people that are going to get upset. And the way I look at that, if people are upset, good. You hit them emotionally. If you hit them emotionally, they're going to question it. They're going to hate you, or they're going to say, right?
Yeah.
And this is what I experienced at CMIC at the start.
Yeah.
We got a lot of like, who are you? You know nothing about mining. Why are you doing this? This is wrong. They get all emotional about it, and now they're the biggest advocates. So I guess the only thing I have left to say, Alim, is that we both must be remarkable.
Sponsored by credit to our sponsor.
I could not resist that.
But I will say this. I think the work that you've done and that you're doing, it's important, not just for the industry. I think it's important for Canada.
Yeah.
Like if you think of what are the 5 or 6 things we do exceptionally well in Canada, mining is one of them. Yeah. We're leaders in the world. Our ability to raise financing and think things through. And we know in Canada that we have a productivity gap. And so putting our, doubling down on our strengths and doing what we do really well and pulling smart people together there to innovate and to commercialize things, that's important work. So anyways, it's good to be able to be here with you and have this conversation.
It was great. And I'm going to pick up that Chip War book and read it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love this stuff.
Yeah, you'll really enjoy it. You'll really enjoy it.
I can't reach.
I know.
Alim, this has been fabulous.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you for tuning into Source. We hope you'll learn some valuable insights and really cool information about the mining industry and especially how it impacts our lives every single day. If you want to stay tuned to what we're up to and the really cool innovations that are going on every single day, connect with us on our social media channels, LinkedIn, Twitter, or at our website, rethinkmining.org. Until next time, catch you later.